My husband confessed to cheating after I found proof on his phone. When I accidentally saw that text notification pop up on my husband's phone while he was in the shower, I thought I'd caught him having a simple affair. But what I discovered by digging deeper would reveal a web of lies so twisted that it would destroy not just our marriage, but 3 other families, and lead to the most shocking confession I never saw coming. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm Emma, 29, and up until last month, I thought I was living the American dream. Married to my college sweetheart David for 6 years, beautiful house in Connecticut, 2 kids under 5, and what I believed was a solid, trustworthy marriage. God, was I naive? It started with something so small, so innocent, that most people wouldn't have given it a second thought. David had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went upstairs for his usual post-dinner shower. Our 4-year-old Mia was coloring at the table, and our 2-year-old Jake was having his nightly meltdown about bedtime, so I was juggling both kids when David's phone lit up. The notification preview was brief, but it might as well have been written in neon lights. Can't wait to feel you inside me again tomorrow. I literally dropped the sippy cup I was holding. Mia looked up from her coloring book and asked why Mommy's face looked funny, which snapped me back to reality. I told her everything was fine, got Jake settled with his favorite stuffed animal, and spent the next 10 minutes staring at that phone like it was going to explode. The notification had disappeared by then, of course. iPhones do that. They show you just enough to ruin your life, then vanish like nothing happened. Here's where most wives would confront their husbands immediately. But I'm not most wives. I'm a paralegal. I know the value of evidence. Asterisk, asterisk. I heard the shower still running upstairs, so I picked up David's phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I knew his passcode. We'd never hidden our phones from each other, which now seemed hilariously ironic. The phone unlocked, and I went straight to his messages. Well, I found it made my knees give out. I actually had to sit down on the kitchen floor, right there next to Jake's scattered Cheerios, because my legs wouldn't support me anymore. There wasn't just one woman. There were 3. 3 different ongoing conversations, 3 different affairs, 3 different sets of explicit photos and messages that made me want to vomit right there on my kitchen tiles. The first was someone named Jessica. The messages went back 4 months. Lots of "I miss you," and "when can we meet again," and photos I will never be able to unsee. Photos of my husband with this woman in positions that we hadn't tried in years. The second was Lauren. 6 months of messages. This one was different, more emotional, less physical. They were talking about feelings, about how unhappy David was in his marriage, about how he wished he could be with her instead of stuck at home with the kids and a wife who doesn't understand him. That one cut deeper than the sexual stuff, honestly. But the third conversation, the one with someone named Ashley, that's the one that made me realize the situation was so much worse than just cheating. Ashley wasn't just some random woman David was sleeping with. Ashley was my sister-in-law, asterisk, asterisk, my brother Mark's wife, the woman I'd considered one of my closest friends for the past 8 years, the woman who'd been my maid of honor, the woman who babysat our kids, the woman who'd held my hand when I was crying about fertility issues and had consoled me through 2 miscarriages. I sat on that kitchen floor, scrolling through months of messages between my husband and my sister-in-law, watching my entire world crumble in real time. The messages between David and Ashley were different from the others. They were comfortable, familiar, like they'd been doing this for a long time. And as I kept scrolling back, I realized they had been. The earliest messages I could find were from over 2 years ago. 2 years. They'd been having an affair for 2 years, and I'd had no idea. But it got worse. So much worse. Because mixed in with all the "I love you" and "I can't wait to leave our spouses," messages were conversations about us. About me and Mark. About how to keep us from finding out. About how to manipulate situations so they could spend more time together. Remember all those times Ashley had suggested couples vacations? The weekend trips where we get adjoining hotel rooms? The family barbecues where David and Ashley would disappear to run to the store together? The times Ashley would offer to help David with projects around our house while I was at work? I've been so grateful for their help. I thought it was wonderful that my husband and sister-in-law got along so well. The shower upstairs turned off, and I realized I had maybe 3 minutes before David came downstairs. I did something I'd never done before in my life. I forwarded evidence to myself. Screenshots of the most damning conversations, photos that proved the affairs were physical, messages that showed the timeline and extent of the betrayal. My fingers were flying across the screen, saving everything I could. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. I deleted the evidence from David's sent folder, cleared the forwarded messages from his phone and placed it back exactly where he'd left it. By the time he walked into the kitchen in his bathrobe, asking where I put his phone charger, I was calmly loading the dishwasher like nothing had happened. The next week was the longest week of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal while processing the fact that my entire marriage was a lie. I had to make small talk with David over breakfast while knowing he'd been inside 3 other women. I had to smile and nod when he told me about his day, knowing that at least some of those days involved betraying me in the worst possible way. But the hardest part was seeing Ashley. She came over that Thursday for our usual weekly coffee date, something we'd been doing for years. She sat in my kitchen, in the same chair she'd been sitting in for years, drinking coffee from the mug I'd bought her for her birthday, asking about my day, and telling me about hers. She mentioned that Mark had been working late a lot lately, and how lonely she'd been feeling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that coffee mug at her lying face. I wanted to ask her how she could look me in the eye and pretend to be my friend while she was destroying my marriage. Instead, I smiled and sympathized about how hard it is when our husbands are busy with work. The irony was suffocating. She even asked how things were going with David and me, said she'd noticed we seemed a little distant lately. The concern in her voice sounded so genuine that for a moment, I almost believed she actually cared. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the 2 years of lies. After she left, I sat in my empty kitchen and cried for the first time since I'd found the evidence. Not just tears, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside me. I cried for my marriage, for my friendship with Ashley, for my kids who were about to have their world turned upside down. But mostly I cried because I realized I had no idea who David really was. The man I'd married, the father of my children, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future. He was a stranger. Asterisk, asterisk. How do you reconcile loving someone with hating them? How do you process the fact that every "I love you" for the past 2 years have been a lie? How do you explain to your 4-year-old why daddy isn't living at home anymore without destroying her sense of security? I started planning. Just like I do at work when I'm building a case, I gathered evidence, organized timelines, and prepared for multiple scenarios. I researched divorce lawyers, calculated our financial situation, and tried to figure out how to protect my kids from the fallout. But I also did something else, something that probably saved my sanity. I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds extreme, but I needed to know everything. If David was capable of this level of deception, what else was he hiding? Were there financial secrets? Other women I hadn't found? Had he put our family at risk in ways I didn't even know about? The PI's name was Robert, and he was exactly what you'd expect. Middle-aged, cynical, and completely unsurprised by my story. He told me that cases like mine were more common than I'd think, that people are capable of compartmentalizing their lives in ways that would shock most honest people. What Robert found in just 1 week of surveillance made the phone evidence look like child's play. Asterisk, asterisk. David wasn't just having 3 affairs. He was living 3 separate lives. With Jessica, he was a successful businessman who was unhappy in his marriage, but working toward an amicable divorce. He told her he was already separated from me and that we were just figuring out custody arrangements. With Lauren, he was the sensitive, misunderstood husband whose wife had become cold and distant after having kids. He'd painted me as someone who'd lost interest in him emotionally and physically, making their affair seem like a natural result of his loneliness. With Ashley, he was the man who'd fallen in love with his brother-in-law's wife and was willing to leave everything behind for true love. He convinced her that what they had was special, worth destroying 2 marriages and hurting 2 families. 3 different stories. 3 different versions of David. 3 different explanations for why cheating was justified. But the most shocking discovery wasn't about the affairs themselves. Robert had followed David to a 4th location, a house across town where he spent Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Asterisk, asterisk. The house belonged to a woman named Patricia. She was 52, divorced, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. And according to Robert's research, David had been telling her he was single. Not unhappily married. Not separated. Single. He'd been dating her for 8 months, taking her to dinner, meeting her friends, spending weekends at her place when he told me he was away on business trips. She had no idea he was married. No idea he had kids. No idea that while she was falling in love with him, he was living a completely different life 20 minutes away. Patricia thought she was in an exclusive relationship with a single man who traveled for work. She'd introduced him to her adult children as her boyfriend. She was planning a future with him. I stared at Robert's photos of David and Patricia holding hands at a restaurant, laughing together at what looked like a romantic dinner, and realized I was looking at a man I'd never met. This wasn't just cheating. This was sociopathic behavior. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Asterisk, asterisk. I was going to confront David, but not the way he expected. I wasn't going to scream or cry or throw his stuff on the lawn. I was going to do something much worse. I was going to tell him the truth about what I discovered and watch his carefully constructed house of cards collapse. I waited until the kids were asleep, poured myself a large glass of wine for courage, and sat down across from David in our living room. He was watching TV, completely relaxed, probably planning which of his girlfriends he'd text later. I placed my phone on the coffee table between us and opened a folder where I'd saved all the evidence. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up from the TV, and I saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. His expression shifted from casual interest to wariness in about 2 seconds. I slid the phone toward him. "I know about Jessica. I know about Lauren. I know about Ashley. And I know about Patricia." The look on his face was something I'll never forget. Asterisk, asterisk. It wasn't guilt or remorse or even surprise. It was calculation. I could literally see him trying to figure out how much I knew and what line might still work. That's when I realized that the David I'd married had never really existed. He picked up the phone and scrolled through the evidence I collected. Photos, messages, timeline of lies. Everything laid out in chronological order like a legal brief. When he finished, he set the phone down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold. Evaluative. Like he was trying to decide whether I was a threat or just an inconvenience. "How long have you known?" he asked. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I can explain." Not, "I love you and made a terrible mistake." Just a tactical question about damage control. "Long enough to get a divorce attorney and a private investigator," I replied. That's when his mask finally slipped completely. What David told me next was more shocking than all the cheating combined. Asterisk, asterisk. He didn't try to deny anything. He didn't make excuses or blame me or claim it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he told me the truth, the real truth, for the first time in years. He'd never been happy in our marriage. Not from the beginning. He'd married me because it was what was expected, what looked good, what fit the life plan he thought he was supposed to want. But he'd been bored and restless from our wedding day forward. The affairs weren't mistakes or lapses in judgment. They were his real life. The marriage, the house, the family man persona. That was the performance. The cheating was where he felt like himself. He told me he'd been planning to leave me for months, but couldn't figure out how to do it without losing half his assets and paying child support. So he'd been stalling, trying to find a way out that didn't cost him financially. Ashley had been pressuring him to leave his marriage, but he'd been stringing her along because he wasn't sure he wanted to commit to anyone long-term. Jessica and Lauren were just for fun. Patricia was his backup plan. A relationship with someone who had her own life and wouldn't expect too much from him. He had it all figured out. Multiple women giving him what he wanted, a respectable family life for appearances, and complete freedom to do whatever he pleased. The only thing he hadn't planned for was getting caught. But here's the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. Asterisk, asterisk. After he finished explaining his elaborate deception, after he'd basically confessed to treating our entire marriage like a part-time job he didn't want, he looked at me and asked if we could work things out. Not because he loved me, not because he wanted to save our marriage or our family, but because divorce was going to be expensive and inconvenient. He suggested we could have an open marriage. He could keep seeing other women, and I could find someone too if that would make me feel better. We could stay married for the kids and for financial reasons, but live separate lives. I stared at this man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, who'd held my hand during labor, who'd helped me pick out paint colors for our children's bedrooms, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. A stranger who thought so little of me that he believed I'd agree to be his cover story while he continued his affairs. I told him to get out. Not pack a bag and go to a hotel for a few days. Get out permanently. Move out completely. I'd already changed the locks. Robert had recommended a locksmith, and I'd already filed the divorce papers that morning. David's calculated composure finally cracked. He'd expected tears, pleading, maybe even threats. He hadn't expected swift, decisive action backed by evidence and legal preparation. He tried negotiating. He offered to give up the other women if I'd take him back. When that didn't work, he tried intimidation, reminding me that I'd be a single mother without his income. When that didn't work, he tried guilt, talking about what divorce would do to the kids. Nothing worked because I'd already thought through all of those scenarios. I'd already consulted with lawyers about custody and support. I'd already talked to a therapist about how to help the kids adjust. I'd already opened my own checking account and secured my financial documents. I'd done everything while he was busy living his multiple lives, and now it was too late for him to stop the consequences. The fallout was swift and brutal. David had to call Ashley and tell her that his wife had found out about their affair. But since I was planning to tell Mark anyway, Ashley's world was about to implode regardless. He had to break up with Jessica and Lauren, both of whom thought they were in exclusive relationships with him. Jessica apparently didn't take it well. She showed up at our house the next day, demanding to talk to me, wanting to know if David had been lying to her about our marriage being over. I told her the truth. David had never left me. We'd never been separated, and she'd been having an affair with a married father of 2 for 4 months. She called him a sociopathic liar and stormed off. I almost felt sorry for her. But the worst confrontation was with Patricia. Remember, Patricia thought David was single. When he had to tell her he was actually married with 2 small children, that everything about their 8-month relationship had been built on lies, she didn't just break up with him. She drove to our house. I was not prepared for Patricia. She was exactly the kind of woman I could see David falling for. Beautiful, put together, successful. Under different circumstances, I probably would have liked her. She stood on my front porch with tears streaming down her face and apologized for unknowingly participating in the destruction of my marriage. She'd brought copies of every text message, every photo, every piece of evidence that David had lied to both of us. Patricia had introduced David to her children as her boyfriend. She'd been talking to her friends about moving in together. She'd been planning a future with a man who didn't exist. We ended up talking for 2 hours. 2 women who'd been completely deceived by the same man, comparing notes and trying to make sense of how we'd both been so thoroughly manipulated. She told me things about David that I'd never known. How charming he could be when he wanted something, how convincing his lies were, how he seemed to genuinely care about her until the moment he didn't. But she also told me something that changed my perspective on everything. Patricia said she was grateful I'd found out when I did, because David had been getting sloppy. He'd been making mistakes, contradicting his own stories, showing signs of the stress that comes from living multiple lies simultaneously. She'd started to suspect something was wrong, but couldn't put her finger on what. If I hadn't discovered the affairs when I did, Patricia thought David would have eventually abandoned her the same way he was planning to abandon me. Suddenly, cruelly, and without explanation. She dodged a bullet by getting involved with a married man, which sounds completely backwards but made perfect sense when she explained it. David wasn't capable of sustainable relationships with any of us. He was capable of performing whatever version of himself he thought each woman wanted, but only temporarily. Eventually, the performance would become too exhausting, and he'd move on to someone new. Patricia, Jessica, Lauren, Ashley, me. We were all just chapters in David's ongoing story of using people for whatever he needed and discarding them when they became inconvenient. The divorce proceedings revealed even more lies. David had been hiding money. Not a lot, but enough to show that he'd been planning his exit strategy for longer than he'd admitted. He'd opened accounts I didn't know about, made investments without telling me, and had been slowly moving assets where I couldn't access them. My lawyer said it was classic behavior for someone planning to leave their spouse, creating financial independence while keeping the other person dependent and uninformed. But the financial deception paled in comparison to what we discovered about his work situation. Remember all those business trips? The ones where he was actually with Patricia? It turns out David had been lying to his employer too. He'd been taking vacation days and personal time, but telling them he was traveling for work-related conferences and training. His company had been paying for hotel rooms and flights for fake business trips, while David was actually having romantic getaways with his girlfriend. When his employer found out, because everything comes out during divorce proceedings, David was fired for fraud. So not only did he lose his marriage and all his girlfriends, he lost his job too. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen writing this story, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. I know that sounds crazy. My husband cheated on me with 4 different women, lied to me for years, tried to defraud me financially, and showed me that our entire marriage was built on deception. How could I possibly be happy about that? Because I'm free. I'm free from living with someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient cover story for his real life. I'm free from the constant, low-level anxiety I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. That feeling that something was wrong, but not knowing what. I'm free from pretending to be happy in a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. The kids are adjusting better than I expected. 4-year-olds are surprisingly resilient when you explain things in terms they can understand. Mia knows that Daddy made choices that hurt Mommy's feelings, so now he lives in a different house, but he still loves her and Jake very much. David gets supervised visitation twice a week. Supervised because I don't trust him to prioritize the children's needs over his own convenience. And I've been proven right several times already. But here's the most shocking part of this entire story. Last month, I got a text from Ashley. She wanted to meet for coffee. She wanted to apologize and try to explain what had happened between her and David. I almost said no, almost blocked her number and moved on completely. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her in a neutral location. What Ashley told me during that conversation changed my understanding of everything that had happened. David hadn't just seduced her. He'd systematically isolated her from Mark, convinced her that her marriage was failing, and positioned himself as her only source of emotional support. He'd used her insecurities and vulnerabilities against her, making her believe that leaving Mark for him was the only way she'd ever be truly happy. Ashley had been as manipulated as the rest of us. She'd ended her marriage for David, believing they were going to start a new life together. When everything fell apart, she lost not just David but also Mark, her stepchildren, her home, and most of her friends. She was living in a studio apartment, working 2 jobs to pay for her divorce lawyer, and dealing with the fact that she destroyed her life for a man who'd never had any intention of actually building a future with her. But here's what really got to me. Ashley asked if I thought she was a terrible person. I looked at this woman who'd been my friend for 8 years, who'd participated in destroying my marriage, and I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Don't get me wrong. What she did was inexcusable. She betrayed our friendship and participated in the destruction of our family. But she'd also been victimized by the same man who'd victimized me. David was like a virus that infected every relationship he touched. He'd used Ashley's loneliness and dissatisfaction with her marriage the same way he'd used Patricia's desire for companionship and Jessica and Lauren's need for excitement. We were all just marks in his elaborate con game. I told Ashley I didn't think she was a terrible person. I thought she was a person who'd made terrible choices, but I understood how David had manipulated her into making them. We're not friends again. Too much damage has been done for that. But we're not enemies either. Mark, Ashley's ex-husband, has become an unexpected ally. He reached out to me after his divorce was finalized, and we've developed a friendship based on our shared experience of being betrayed by people we trusted completely. Mark had suspected something was wrong in his marriage, but had blamed himself for Ashley's growing distance. He thought he wasn't being a good enough husband, wasn't giving her enough attention, wasn't meeting her emotional needs. Learning about the affair had been devastating, but it had also been a relief. The problems in his marriage weren't his fault. They were the result of his wife systematically deceiving him for 2 years. Mark and I have coffee once a month now. We talk about co-parenting, about healing from betrayal, about learning to trust our instincts again. He's dating someone new, a teacher he met through friends, and seems genuinely happy for the first time in years. Sometimes I wonder if Mark and I might become something more than friends eventually. We understand each other in a way that people who haven't been through this kind of betrayal can't. We've both learned to value honesty above everything else. But right now, I'm focusing on myself and my kids, on building a life that's authentic and genuine and based on truth rather than performance. I've started dating again, carefully and selectively. I'm upfront about my situation from the beginning. I tell potential partners that I'm divorced, that trust is extremely important to me, and that I have zero tolerance for dishonesty of any kind. Most men appreciate the directness. The ones who don't usually disappear quickly, which saves everyone time. I've learned to pay attention to inconsistencies in people's stories. I notice when someone's words don't match their actions. I trust my instincts when something feels off instead of explaining away red flags. David taught me that people are capable of incredible deception when it serves their purposes. But he also taught me that I'm stronger and more capable than I ever realized. I survived the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my marriage and came out better on the other side. The most ironic part of this whole story, David is miserable. He's living in a small apartment across town, working a job that pays half what his previous position did, and dealing with the fact that his reputation in our community is completely destroyed. None of his former girlfriends want anything to do with him. Patricia blocked his number and moved to another state. Jessica and Lauren both realize they dodge bullets and want nothing to do with a proven liar and manipulator. Ashley learned her lesson about men who cheat with married women. David went from having everything, a wife, a family, multiple girlfriends, a successful career, and the respect of his community, to having nothing. It was entirely his own doing. Sometimes I feel sorry for him, but then I remember how coldly he'd calculated our entire relationship, how little he'd valued our children's stability, how willing he'd been to destroy multiple families for his own gratification. Then I don't feel sorry for him anymore. Here's what I want every person reading this to understand. If someone is capable of lying to you about something as fundamental as fidelity, they're capable of lying to you about anything. If someone can look you in the eye every day while living a completely different life behind your back, they're not someone you can ever truly trust. If someone treats your marriage like a part-time job while their real life happens elsewhere, you deserve better. Much better. The truth is always better than the most beautiful lie, even when the truth destroys everything you thought you knew about your life. I'm happier alone and honest than I ever was married and deceived. And finally, here's the update I never expected to write. 2 weeks ago, I ran into David at the grocery store. He looked tired, older, like the stress of maintaining all those lies had been aging him prematurely, and now the effects were catching up. He asked how the kids were doing, made small talk about the weather, then asked if I'd ever consider giving him another chance. He said he'd learned his lesson. He said he realized what he'd lost. He said he wanted to be a better man, a better father, a better husband. I looked at this man who'd systematically deceived me for years, who'd treated our marriage like an inconvenient obligation, who'd been willing to destroy our family for his own entertainment, and I realized something that surprised me. I felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction at seeing how far he'd fallen. Just nothing. He was a stranger asking a favor from someone who owed him nothing. I told him I hoped he found whatever he was looking for, but it wouldn't be with me. Then I finished my shopping and went home to my kids, to my authentic life, to my future that belongs entirely to me. The best revenge against someone who lied to you for years isn't making them suffer. It's building a life so genuine and fulfilling that their deception becomes irrelevant. It's becoming so happy and secure that their absence feels like a gift rather than a loss. It's realizing that they did you a favor by showing you who they really were, even if it took you longer than you'd like to see it. David cheated on me with 4 different women and destroyed our marriage with his lies. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes the worst betrayal is actually the greatest liberation. Trust me on this one. Update. Mark and I are officially dating now. Turns out surviving the same type of betrayal creates a foundation of understanding that's pretty hard to shake. Who knew? Asterisk. The kids love him. He makes me laugh every day. And most importantly, he tells me the truth about everything, even when it's uncomfortable. Asterisk. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor, but it usually works out in the end. Asterisk.